to pass a small incremental bill, and with the knowledge that we are not coming back until next month again, that's 2 rent checks. And the last time we left, again, we lost over 9/11's worth of people due to this lack of action. And so we really need to acknowledge that this small bill, whilst again something is better than nothing, and frankly Democrats fought very, very hard to get basic things like testing. Republicans didn't want to fund hospitals. They didn't want to fund mass testing, which is what is actually going to allow us to reopen the economy. So I appreciate the strides that they made in that. But ultimately, in voting on the text of this bill, knowing that we are abdicating our responsibility. We haven't legislated for a month.
AOC, whatever you want to think about her, is absolutely right here. Basically, the Senate Republicans working with the Democratic Party passed a stimulus bill in order to replenish the funds from the small business loan program. Now, this bill ended up being $484 billion, tacking on to the 2-point-something trillion that was spent prior. The Democratic Party in the Senate, basically the only thing they got out of this is testing, and didn't even get that strong of an oversight. Workers, poor, the population itself, not so much. They couldn't even get necessarily money for the states. Now, AOC, as you heard there, was entirely against this particular bill, making the point that it is better for this bill to fail, meaning for an inadequate bill to fail, as opposed to that inadequate bill succeeding and giving it this kind of implicit patina that this indeed was on some level adequate. This bill was massively inadequate. You had, right now, 26 million people file for unemployment. That's 5 weeks in. They're making the argument that the rate or the unemployment rate may hit over 25% coming up in the summertime. That's just in a few months, because the job losses are expected to continue to go up. This also means that millions, like 10 million people, no longer have health insurance because their health insurance is tethered to their jobs. So when we are making the very basic point that, look, before the coronavirus took place, the majority of the population was living paycheck to paycheck. Before the virus took place, the majority of the population didn't have $500 in the bank. Before the population took place, we were loaded down as a population in debt with wages, real wages that hadn't necessarily gone up over the course of like 20 years. So understand what we're talking about here in regards to where this was positioned from jump. And within 5 weeks, 43% of the population have either lost their jobs or have lost their wages. California or Los Angeles, you have more than half of the population that is literally out of work. And the unemployment claims went up to 26 million. And again, that number will only go up. The Trump administration and the Democratic Party gave $1,200 to the population as if that $1,200 was somehow going to hold back the night. That $1,200 is not even enough for many people's rent, let alone rent, medical expenses, car note, healthcare costs, if indeed healthcare costs plays or come into part of this. Whatever those people's bills, those bills didn't go anywhere. And many of them no longer had a job. Meaning we are creating vulnerability and difficult situations all throughout our society. And whereas rational government will engage that, would create a situation where people aren't incentivized to go back to work, or create a situation where people aren't incentivized to agitate to get back to work because of vulnerability regarding their needs, our government doesn't do that. It doesn't take rational action to prevent those people from going back. Instead, our government basically wants those people to go back to work. They're okay with those people being out there agitating to try to force the very local governments to start back to work. Donald Trump has been working behind the scenes to do this. Right-wing media has been trying to create a basis of argumentation that would excuse millions of people potentially dying, or hundreds of thousands of people potentially dying, in pursuit of restarting the economy for the 1% and the profits of the 1%. So AOC has an extremely good point here saying, look, this is not enough. We have real pressing concerns and real pressing pain, especially in the context of her communities. Because again, you're talking about communities of color, and from the standpoint of communities of color are disproportionately affected health-wise by the COVID-19 virus. AOC is also in New York, which is the epicenter of the world at this point, with 20,861 deaths and 268,581 cases. So Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans pass a deal that doesn't deal with the material needs of the population, doesn't deal with those people's bills, doesn't deal with any of that stuff, doesn't even deal with making sure states have money. Instead, they pass the Republicans' plan. The House of Representatives pass the Republicans' plan tonight. AOC was the lone Democrat voting against that plan with 4 other Republican representatives. I'm going to play another video with AOC making her case in regards to why she wasn't against or why she wasn't for this plan and why this level of incrementalism shouldn't have been accepted. Meaning there needs to be a bar at the door regarding to how low the Democratic Party is willing to go in regards to making these deals. The House of Representatives wanted to pass their own version of this legislation in order to come up with some kind of deal between the two sides. That's not what the House of Representatives is doing. AOC's point is, why are we acquiescing? This is an outright betrayal. And in real terms, the fact that McConnell has basically put the kibosh on any idea of having another stimulus, the fact that it will likely be months before these guys actually get back to get back to work in a real capacity, and the fact that the pain is only going to get worse and it's not going anywhere. AOC is absolutely right in what she is saying. But the thing that you need to realize, though, is while she would simultaneously take this position, she also has no capacity at all to take any action that would be the strongest action in trying to actually get her policy objectives accomplished. Meaning the best that she could do is basically, yes, take a vote here or there. She could complain, but she's constrained in regards to the actions that she can take. This is part and parcel to the reason that I kind of want to point out of why people argue that movements die in the Democratic Party, that the Democratic Party is basically the mass grave to movements. And I'm going to explain this in the context of AOC's actions over the last week. Welcome to Late Night Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. As I said, the Senate passed the deal for tonight. The House of Representatives passed the deal. $484 billion. The $484 billion is the 4th large coronavirus and revives the Small Business Administration Paycheck Protection Program, which ran out of funds last week. The bill also has $75 billion for hospitals and $25 billion for testing. Those are the 2 items that the Democratic Party won. And again, this is something that should have just been good God common sense. You're in the middle of a pandemic. You need testing if you want to open back the economy. Democrats ended up fighting on this particular point as this is their win, meaning they didn't win at all. The package had passed 388 to 5 and now goes on to President Trump's desk for signature. AOC was against it. Now, a few days before this vote, this is what AOC said when asked about this deal.
In communities of color and working class communities is why people are dying. It is the compounding effects and the comorbidities that are leading to the surge of deaths in our communities by COVID-19. But that being said, when we talk about the solutions that Congress needs to have moving forward, I just think it's important for us to say that incrementalism is not helpful in this moment. It's not helpful for people to say, oh, well, we got something, so we might as well support it. We got a nickel, we got a dime in $1 trillion bill, so a nickel is more than nothing, so we should support it, is unacceptable. And we have to make sure that we demand meaningful change and meaningful assistance for working families. That means $2,000 a month plus 1,000 for your kids recurring. That means everyone who needs to go to a hospital can go to a hospital without their last words being before being intubated being, how much is this going to cost me, which is what is happening in our district. Their last words about being words being uttered about people being worried about the financial position that they're putting their family in because they contracted a virus that they have no control over contracting.
Now, here's the thing. AOC is right here. But I want you to notice how this logic breaks down. You heard her point. This is unacceptable. This is not a race to the bottom. We're not going to accept a penny while you give yourself trillions. This is entirely unacceptable. Yes, a penny is more than nothing, but it's negligent, and we are not necessarily going to accept this. Now, fair enough. But notice how this logic breaks down when she selects and will be willing to vote for Joe Biden. Meaning, why is it that this bill is unacceptable? Because it doesn't go far enough in addressing the ills of your particular society and your particular community. And I agree with you. By the same token, Joe Biden is acceptable, even though he's basically against pretty much every policy proposal that you and Sanders and the left backs. Why is one acceptable and the other one not? I guess I understand the notion of a slippery scale on this point, but, you know, the reason that she's standing against this is because she's making the point that, yeah, this is too low. This is not acceptable, and nor am I going to pretend like it is. By the same token, if you're willing to take that stance on this bill, wouldn't the same thing hold true for Joe Biden, especially from the standpoint of the left? Now, the reality of it is, AOC would never take the position or the actions that she will need in order to get anything that she wants from a policy concession done. And this, I think, is where the notion that movements and mass graves go to die. Yes, she could stand strong on certain points. She could stand strong in making her particular position. And again, I agree with her entirely on this. She's right. There are certain levels that you shouldn't go, and you don't want to legitimize that race to the bottom. However, we also should be aware that she is constrained just based on party politics. Either the committee seats that she may not want to get access to, either peer pressure of these are the people who we work with in the context of a team engagement or a team competition where she's part team Democrat against the other Republican Party. For that matter, whether the party runs people against you like they did Cynthia McKinney. There are certain things that take place within the party politic that restrains the actions and the agency of the various political leaders. Even if those people tend to be a firebrand, they're still measures just within the intrinsic structures of the party politics itself that corrals their behavior. Movements go to die in the political process. The fact of the matter is movements go beyond just the notion of one individual or this other individual getting elected. Movements have a higher strategy and a higher priority. They are very specific into what they're trying to accomplish. If the issue is civil rights, then everything else is subordinate to getting the civil rights accomplished, even in the context of electoral politics. Meaning there are some situations that from the context of a movement, say you were pushing for Medicare for all, it may be in your best interest to make sure that candidate fails. So going forward, people full well understand that unless you are towing this particular line as a minimum, you have no chance to get elected. This is kind of what she's trying to pull off right here. But the entirety of the Democratic Party basically went in line and voted for this deal, despite the fact that it didn't necessarily do anything for workers. The other part to this, where she's also right, but again, movements go to die, has to do with this notion of engagement of the population. The largest share of the community that tends to not vote tends to be people of color and tends to be the poor, under 30,000 or 30,000 and under, and people of color. These people have gotten to the point where they don't see how their engagement into political process pays dividends, meaning Democrats worshiping at the altar of incrementalism, just like this bill is a great example of. Well, in working at the altar of incrementalism and taking all of that money and not doing anything major that would adversely affect their donors, or for that matter, adversely affect their potential at getting a job at some kind of corporation or some kind of lobbyist or whatever. In doing so, you have crippled your ability to get elected because you have deadened so many or so much of the population and a share of the population that would have been most likely in your demographic of voting. So think of it as, yeah, you were able to take a lot of cash. Yes, you were doing incrementalism, but you end up injuring yourself in a wider sense because a lot of people who would have typically voted for you no longer saw how their voting or their engagement in the political process paid off material dividends that would have incentivized their continued engagement. You're suppressing your own vote. That's the point. And the left, by not having any level of accountability in the political process towards the Democratic Party because they were so terrified, and this idea of lessening harm in the very specific moment basically has instantiated the various vagaries and the ills of our society because there's no particular point where those ills can be dealt with. It's the left that wants to deal with those ills. And if the left policy prescriptions are basically marginalized because the left folds into whatever the Democratic Party runs with out of fear of the Republicans, then that means that the left will never get what they want accomplished. They will be taken advantage of. They will incentivize their own being taken advantage of by a Democratic Party that, for the most part, wants your vote, but it doesn't want your opinion. And as long as you're willing to give that vote without having any kind of policy concessions, nothing changes. My issue and my point here is this is not a video to beat up on AOC. I'm just making this very basic point of showing how she may have certain tendencies that may go towards radical and everything else. But what AOC would really need to say in this moment will basically be something like, Joe Biden is not getting my support without him towing the line for Medicare for all, and I am standing in solidarity with these youth groups that are trying to push Biden to accept these policies. Now, in doing so, she would give backbone to many of these youth groups that are out there saying, we demand policies. And again, a demand without having any kind of consequence associated with that demand is only a suggestion. Race to the bottom is over with. If Joe Biden wants my support, Joe Biden is going to go with Medicare for all and getting rid of college debt. My constituencies need this. This is something that is greatly important to my constituency. And so, yeah, my vote, my support, my endorsement is contingent upon that. Now, what would the other youth groups do if they had AOC say something like that? Many of those youth groups will probably grow a spine. Many will grow a backbone. It would probably spread. But imagine for the moment if you had 10 million people standing in solidarity saying you are not going to get my support unless you are towing the line for Medicare for all or elimination of college debt. And you will lose if you don't. And mean it. Think of the legitimacy that takes place in the next election. And by the way, if he actually believes that you mean it, he may be forced into concessions. By the same token, you also need to be prepared that the Democratic Party may lose. But again, you're not on the same team in this. Your objective was to get your policy prescriptions accomplished. And the fact is, just because they lost doesn't necessarily mean you're further away from getting those objectives accomplished. Fact of the matter is, over the last 50 years, what you have done has not worked. The party has moved further and further and further to the right, mainly because there was no accountability for the left in regards to what the Democratic Party was doing. And out of this notion of pragmatism, you look at elections as individual things as opposed to something over the course of time. So yes, you vote for the Democrat because you believe you're terrified of the Republican. And then in 4 years, that Democrat gets worse. The Republican gets worse. And again, pragmatically, you vote for the worst. And then in 4 years, you do the exact same thing. And then in 4 years, you do the exact same thing. And then 4 years, you do the exact same thing. At a certain point, the votes of the left at that point are just assumed, which means they don't have to give you anything. They have no expectation of giving you anything. You've already given them the farm, so they don't have to give you squat regarding concessions. I'm saying that process needs to change. I'm also saying that one concentration camp less for this election, and you go with this notion that that's a perfectly okay strategy, then in 20 years, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are now building 20 additional concentration camps, and you're still voting Democrat under this notion that it's one less, missing the point that over the context of time, you've now expanded 20 additional concentration camps. I guess I'm making the point that there needs to be some standards in your voting processes. There need to be red lines and litmus tests in regards to what you are willing and what you are not willing to accept. And until you are willing to stand by those red lines, until you are willing to say, yeah, no, this is where I get off, nothing changes. Meaning, if you want us and you want to get us to back you and endorse you and stump for you and all of this other stuff, then it is logical as logical could be that you give concessions in order to bring over that support. And the very basic point that your pathway to getting anything that you want to accomplish is standing under the notion of policy and allowing Democrats, Republicans, independents, pretty much anybody that agrees with those policies to stand in solidarity with you to put that pressure on the political space to get what you want. That is your path to getting policy accomplished. It is not necessarily entirely within the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. If anything, you will need somebody in there to help you out in regards to implementing the policies itself. By the same token, I don't believe that that's where the change is going to come from. Like, share, subscribe.